I'm waiting for Microsoft Windows. And while that's going on, I want to tell you an amusing story about this room when I first taught in 2001. I'll save the punchline for the end. But imagine a double class, so we had, I think, 72 students in this room. And I'll tell you the title of the course in a minute, but one of the things that came up was drug use among young people in Canada. So this is about week 4, and I developed a bit of a rapport and some trust with my students. And I said, here's what I'd like you to do. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you smoke marijuana, okay, within the last 30 days. Not in a lifetime, but within the last 30 days. But I don't want you to be influenced by other people around you. So what you have to do is close your eyes, put your hand over like that, and raise your hand. And only I'm going to see who's raising their hand. And when I get an estimation or a count, you can put your hands down. These are young, 17 to, I think my oldest student in that class was about 40. Anyway, I went over the drill again. You know what I'm asking you to do? They said, yes. You're going to stick by the rules? Yes. So you did it. 2/3 of the class put up their hand. The title of the class that I was teaching was Introduction to Law Enforcement. Later on, I met 2 students who said that they were quite comfortable about telling me that during the 2 breaks I had for the 3-hour class that they would go outside and light up, and here, if you want to take one home. Fine. We don't accept gifts from students. But my top students, they were the 2. One of those students was a woman in her late 30s, and everything that she touched in university turned to an A or an A+. So this myth about motivational syndrome and how cannabis cuts into people's intellectual and analytical abilities is just a fiction. In fact, if anything, I think it stimulates people's creativity.
Yeah.
So, I want to tell you a little bit about me and how I ended up here, but I have to tell you that I'm taking my LEPUP hat off right now. I'm not speaking on behalf of law enforcement against prohibition. But I want to say 2 things about Canada. One is why we're in the dark ages, and I'm really angry with you. And the other one is I'm really glad that we have certain policies in place that's enabled me to get where I am. In 1972, I left Vancouver, and just as I was leaving, I was driving by myself to start university at the University of Regina. That was my plan anyway. And my brother tucked 2 joints in my shirt pocket and said, smoke these on the way. And at the time I was, I smoked pot. I knew I was a genuine pot smoker because someone pointed out, you smoke pot even when you're alone. But I haven't had any cannabis for probably 10 or 12 years. And that's my choice. I might revisit that decision because I've got osteoarthritis that's causing me a lot of pain. And I just need to learn more about that. Maybe there's a doctor in Mid-Island area that will prescribe. I also heard about pot you could smoke or ingest. It doesn't necessarily make you high, but it relieves the pain.
Yes,
so,
that's right.
And as the baby boomers age and osteoarthritis becomes more and more common, I think that there's going to be a greater demand on that product and the legalization for it. More and more people are going to be applying for licenses. So the other thing, I wasn't a fool. I took the 2 marijuana joints and I rolled them up in my sleeve because I thought they should be somewhere secure. And I got as far as Banff, Alberta, and I pulled the U-turn in Banff at 12:30 at night, and 2 young RCMP officers pulled me over. This is in the pre-charter era, and if you're a young person, you don't know how lucky you are to have the Canadian Charter rights and freedoms. Because in those days, the police didn't need a reason to pull you over. They could just do it, and they could search you and your vehicle without a warrant and without any kind of, rational reason for doing so. And that's what they did. They searched me, and they made me roll down my sleeves, and 2 joints dropped out. That was on a Thursday night. By noon the next day, I had received a $500 fine and 30 days in jail. Well, $500 in 1972 might as well have been $5,000. So was I ever angry? Holy smokes, I even said something in court that the judge overheard, but thought it was the Mountie who was testifying who'd said it, so he reamed him out. But there I was in jail, with all, like in one of the most violent prisons. You hear about this stuff and you read about it on TV, but it's this dormitory style provincial prison. The nickname was Spy Hill. I have no idea on the map where it is because it was dark when they took me there. And I swore, I got really angry, and I swore that if I ever got to a position in life where I could be influential, I was going to work really hard to change those marijuana laws. And I've been doing that through teaching and what we choose to teach in our criminology curriculum for 22 years, and to getting people to rethink what we're actually doing. And then 2 years ago, David Bratzer, a really courageous policeman in Victoria, approached me and said, do you want to start a Canadian chapter of law enforcement against prohibition? And I said, sign me up. And then he phoned me later on and said, well, would you like to be vice president? So here I am, and I have to tell you, David is one of the most courageous people because as far as I know, he's the only sworn peace officer in Canada that's taken a stand. And he has to eat his lunch by himself, on a working shift. He's not popular among other police. But there's this thing we call the green light syndrome. As long as the green light of the microphone's on, you get a certain pitch from police officers and civic leaders and politicians. As soon as the green light on the microphone goes off, then they say, well, geez, we've got to legalize this stuff sooner or later. I mean, it's just so on and so on. So I will start the show. Ted, do you have the building until 4 and then they're going to kick you out?
Oh, no, we haven't passed that.
Oh.
Thanks.
Because I think it's only taking 30 to 40 minutes.
So we do a little raffle and hang out in the hallway for a while.
As you can see, it's time for VIU to get a technology update.
While we're waiting, can you answer a question?
Sure.
You said that police have this green light syndrome. On the microphone, when it's on, they speak. When it's off, they say, one day it's going to be legalized. Why has it taken so long for them to actually get it officially? I mean, we all know that it makes sense. All the educated, very bright people in this room. What is it about officialdom that puts wax in their ears and covers their eyes? Why can't they see what that makes sense to all the rest of us? What is it about being in Ottawa or working for the government or something that puts that mindset forward that we can't, we have to keep it illegal because, and they don't give us a because, they just jail us.
One day I had lunch with the inspector of the RCMP in our dining room here, and I said, Ward, what? We were kind of on a first name basis, and I said, I think we developed a certain amount of trust, and I said, Ward, what would it take the RCMP, what evidence would convince the RCMP that cannabis is not a gateway drug, doesn't lead to addiction, people can function normally, and really the most dangerous thing about cannabis is getting caught with it. Yeah. And he paused for a minute and he said, there really isn't any evidence because we don't set the policy. It's our masters in Ottawa. So it's a closed mind about evidence, And then I'm reminded of a joke where one cow comes into the barn and says to the other cow, I just found out how they make hamburger. And the other cow turns and says, conspiracy theorist. But after a while, you see how the laws, particularly around drugs, serve certain interests. The federal Crown prosecutor at one time here for this region, in Nanaimo, made nearly $1 million in a single year on the prosecution of drug crimes, because they're federal. So that's the legal community, is fairly mute on drug reform. There are some voices out there, but you don't really hear a strong push from the Canadian Bar Association saying, let's change cannabis laws, let's apply pressure on.
So it's about money then?
Well, it's about money, it's about interests.
It's all about money.
It's about people's personal incomes and wealth. It's hard to believe, but it's true that some people, as odd as it may sound, really believe, for reasons that probably have much to do with their background, their religious training, the way that they were brought up, that cannabis is indeed a dangerous drug. And there's no amount of evidence that they will accept. It's, and I don't mean to, it doesn't matter what religious group you think of, but some religious groups, no matter what evidence you present, contrary to their beliefs, it won't convince them that either God doesn't exist or Yahweh doesn't exist or there's alternative explanations to the creation of the universe or how humankind came to be on the planet. I apologize. I never thought this would be so slow. In my office, it's really fast. Oh, here we go.
So as long as these people are in power, we're never going to get any change, are we?
Well, I was really impressed with the last federal election and the showing of the NDP. If young people get out there and vote, I think there's real hope for some genuine change. And the Liberal Youth Party voted in favor of
Yes. Right on.
Actually, I believe the Liberal, Amy, maybe, do you know where it is? But the Liberal Youth Club on campus here is
I
having a
haven't heard
convention.
anything more from her about it.
Oh,
so
okay. There's supposed to be something in 2 days.
They
but-
were going to have a town hall style meeting with the youth club on campus, Liberal Youth Club. But she contacted me about organizing it, and then just never really could make it. But it's the end of the semester.
From a legal point of view, you think it's going to be changed through the courts or the politicians?
Well, the politicians have to listen to the courts, but the way around the courts is to change the laws. The laws, however, have to be consistent with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I think any government has got a real uphill battle if they're going to try and erode the momentum that's already going. Look at the high-profile groups that are coming forward, and not just cannabis, but other illicit drugs too, so-called illicit drugs, because there's no such thing in law as an illegal drug or an illicit drug. There's only the Controlled Substances Act, which gives the Minister of Health the power to regulate drugs, which is why we can have Insight open, because the former minister said that to serve the interests of the health needs of the people in the downtown east side, we actually have to have Insight operate. And when they tried to close it, the Insight and their activists went to the Supreme Court and prevented Insight from being closed. So, I think the Conservative government would it would be politically perilous for them to become more, like try and roll back some of the progress that's already being made. Now, I realize that they have passed Bill C-10, this Safe Streets and Communities Act, which is a bit of fiction. Quite a fiction. But, I mean, I talk to police officers who are my former students, and it doesn't matter where they are, what part of British Columbia they're in, they say, for small amounts of marijuana, you know, we'll take it away, we'll dump it, or they've got some kind of code for evidence that's seized and destroyed rather than cataloged. Sorry?
How is it destroyed?
Some part of it. City police, they can just dump it in the sewer.
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah, that might be helpful. Am I in control of lights here?
Over by the.
We should be recycling that.
This should be automatic.
Down to the end. Behind the banner.
I think they're behind the banner,
Yeah.
Down.
on the other side there.
Like these.
That's more like.
I think this is the light panel.
Yeah, that's bigger.
It's not their
Might be up there.
We welcome civilian members. There's no reason why anybody could not become a member of LEAP if you'd like to. In 1983, Vancouver pretrial opened up, and I was fresh out of university, and I had a bachelor's degree in criminology, and I thought I'd like to work in corrections. So I left the Ministry of Health to take this job. It wasn't, I mean, I was there for 5 years, but really 3 on paper, because I decided to do a master's degree, and there was some time off associated with that. Law Enforcement Against Prohibition is a fairly new Canadian chapter organized by David Bratzer. And our key message is that the war on drugs is a failed policy, and LEAP supports policies that lower the incidence of disease, crime, and addiction. So if some of the information that the RCMP are quick to convey to the public about organized crime having control of the cannabis trade, then to take cannabis outside of that trade and regulate it like tobacco or alcohol would have an impact on crime. What we're talking about is not having a free market, a libertarian market, but regulating drugs to keep them from vulnerable populations and take away the profit motive from organized crime. And one of the points that I like to bring up with the public whenever I get the chance is if we look at the declining rates of tobacco use among young people since about 1980, it's really striking. Fewer and fewer young people are taking up smoking than ever before. That tobacco is a really deadly drug. But we've been able to convince Canadians to either not start smoking or quit smoking without threatening them with prison. So we can do the same thing by honestly educating people about cannabis and letting them make informed choices. We do that with alcohol too. Alcohol is quite regulated. So I just wanted to start with talking a little bit about the prevalence of drug use. The most recent government studies, this is US data, show that the number of people above the age of 12 who use an illegal drug is 112 million, 46% of the population. Drug use is endemic in North America. Now that's any time, that's any lifetime use. And these 3 gentlemen have all confessed at one time to having used marijuana, but I think one of them said he didn't inhale.
All 3 of them still do.
Yeah, I'm having some problems with the PowerPoint here. It's the memory is on this machine is just so. So I'll push a key and nothing will happen. I'll push it again, and then 5 minutes from now,
Yeah.
So it's just slow.
The mouse click work too.
Pardon me?
The mouse click works sometime with PowerPoint.
Yeah. Okay. Here's some Canadian data on the prevalence of cannabis use, and there's where I've taken it from, the Canadian Addiction Survey. You can look at the different years that you will have slightly different findings depending upon the year. I'm a little suspect about how they gather this information, but it's remarkable that half of men and 40% of women, nearly 40% of women, admitted that they had used cannabis sometime during a lifetime. And this is a telephone interview from a randomly selected population, random digit dialing. So it's not something that is alien to the Canadian experience. What's disturbing for myself and other people that study these things is how the enforcement effort in Canada is directed at cannabis crimes. And cannabis crimes are frequently the result not so much in trends in use, but in enforcement activity by the police. So the more resources that the police have to discover victimless crimes, like prostitution, illegal gambling, drug use, the more they can discover and report and enter into their statistics. So one way to think about it is that if Nanaimo hired 2 more drug squad officers, would the crime rate go up or down? It would go up, because they've got more resources to go after that bottomless pit, and I really think it is the bottomless pit of cannabis crimes or drug crimes.
More bullies on the playing field.
Sorry?
More bullies on the playing field.
Yeah. Yeah. More
That's
bullies.
the safest kind of bust they can do. That's why they do it, for sure. Why go up and try to bust up a gang? Well, all you gotta do is go around and sniff the neighborhood.
Not to cast aspersions on my neighbors in this area, but when we were on strike last spring, I'd be up at 5:15 to get on the picket line, and I'd walk up and down Wakasaya on the far side of the street, and the odor of cannabis was just, it's not smoked cannabis, it's the rich bud smell. So, yeah, I mean, I wonder how many of those homes are, income generating.
There's no risk.
Is there 2 or 3 hydroponic stores in Nanaimo? 2 for sure. There's Trident on
Three.
At least 3.
Not including Home Depot.
Well, you really do in Nanaimo when you go to the Mohawk gas station, you're paying for your gas, and there's 8 different types of rolling paper that are lined up on the.
Welcome to the
Hemp drinks everywhere, yeah.
Okay, so the previous slide was the proportion of cannabis charges, and it was for simple possession. So the lion's share of drug enforcement is for simple possession, which I think is disturbing in this late era that we're living in. I mean, I remember the Ladane report in 1976 that came out and recommended that marijuana be decriminalized, and we're still dragging our feet on it. So it's a bit discouraging, but on the other hand, this kind of thing would not have existed in the 70s when I grew up, because you all would have been busted on the way here or on the way out.
That's right.
So there has been some liberalization, maybe not so much in our laws, but in the way that the police and the Crown are prepared to pursue these things.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What's the difference between lifetime adjusted and lifetime?
I'm not sure. I think it's probably an artifact of the data that they want consumers to know about. So I can't speak to that exactly. I'd have to have the text in front of me, and I've read it, but I've forgotten it. But the important part here is that if you look at lifetime or yearly or 30-day prevalence, they ask people if they smoked cannabis or used cannabis in the last 30 days. or in the last year, or ever, ever in your life. And then those three graphs show it. So in the last 30 days is the dark graph. Of course, the younger people are more likely to report in the last 30 days they used cannabis. Okay, don't do that. Where's Bill Gates when you need him? And then, the lifetime one. But look at 82% of the respondents here in the 50 and over are reporting that sometime in their lifetime they use drugs. I think that's astounding.
Yeah.
Is that drugs or just cannabis?
Cannabis, sorry. Okay, this is cannabis used by BC residents. Approximately 52%, at least those are the ones that were prepared to confess to it over the phone to an anonymous interviewer, or anonymously to an interviewer, have used cannabis in their lifetime. 17% use the drug at least once in the previous 12 months. A 2010 survey by the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University revealed that the majority of high school students report drug use or sales on school grounds. And there's severe penalties in the United States for having drugs even within 1,000, some states even within 1,000 feet of a school.
Is that all drugs or just cannabis?
Well, they're talking about drugs, generically, yeah. Students report that it's easier to buy illegal drugs than it is to buy beer or cigarettes. Beer and cigarettes are controlled, and proprietors will ask for ID or they risk losing their license. Not so the case with underground economies. I want to show you some pictures from the downtown east side. When I'm not an academic, my hobby is photography, and I like to go to the downtown east side. I usually get somebody to take me around. Got some contacts there. I pay them. They're like a tour guide, and this is burned down now. What was it called? Blunt Brothers. Yeah. So I'll talk now about some of the unintended consequences of the war on drugs. Well, the big one is organized crime, violence that racks the communities. I mean, you've got four former, and it's too bad they're former. I wish they would have come out and said this when they were current attorney generals. Now saying that, this war on drugs that we're waging is just a waste of money and human resources, and we're sustaining organized crime. We are creating the structural conditions to feed organized crime with our drug laws. How long is it going to take for the politicians in power to get it? We have to keep saying it over and over and over again. Criminologists have been telling Canadians since 1998 that the crime rates are dropping. They're just beginning to realize it now. Yeah, crime rates are dropping. They've heard it over and over and over again. And it really came to the fore when the Conservatives waded in with Bill C-10, which is premised on the idea that Canada is unsafe. Okay, that's going to vary by neighborhood. I mean, in some neighborhoods it doesn't feel like that. So the Canadian drug policy is this continuing emphasis on supply side expenditures. It's on enforcement. More than 70% of the dollars that are spent to control drugs in Canada are on enforcement. And I don't think we really have a way of accounting for how much money is spent, because some of the budgets of these agencies are secret. And some drug trials alone cost over $1 million. And they might not get a conviction. The Criminal Lawyers Association in 2003 estimated that 600,000 Canadians have criminal records as a result of cannabis possession. I forgot to tell you the good news about that, doing 30 days in jail. My dad bailed me out after 28. I still had another 32 days to go when he bailed me out. Yeah, in 1980, one of my professors recommended that I get a pardon. So I applied for one, and the pardon system worked really smoothly. Within 8 months, I had a letter from Bob Kaplan, who was the Solicitor General at the time, congratulating me for my pardon. That pardon later enabled me to be a correctional officer. Unreal. When your record's sealed, there is no record. It's
That they
completely
can
sealed.
bring up in a court of law.
Well,
Whenever they
I should be careful about that because if I'm applying for a federal job and they say, do you have a criminal record? The correct answer for me is, I have no criminal offenses for which I have not received a pardon. Period. That's the end of it. Can't ask any more questions. I'm not ashamed of my criminal record for the drug conviction. I'm ashamed of my country. You know, that's So, you know, in a post 9/11 world, international travel is restricted, and some forms of employment are not available for those with criminal records. In the United States, if you get arrested, never mind convicted, that goes on a state file in the state that you were arrested in, and it remains with you for the rest of your life. Some jobs you cannot get if you've ever been arrested.
And you don't get to vote either down there.
Yeah, if you're a felon, you don't get to vote. I was in an art gallery, I think it's Carroll Street, and the police just grabbed this guy and started searching him. I don't know if they had reasonable and probable grounds because I wasn't in earshot of what transpired. But you can see the policeman pulling in a bag of something in a baggie that looks like a white powder. So, I mean, this kind of drug control is like shooting fish in a barrel. That's how the police describe it. It's so easy to enforce. The people who are using cocaine in the mansions in North Vancouver and West Vancouver aren't going to get seen. They're not in public space when they consume drugs. So it's a very class and racist type of pattern that we see in Canada and the United States. On April 7, 2003, police deployed extra personnel to suppress the open-air drug market and to restore community in the vicinity of Hastings and Maine. Okay. Yeah, you remember that police crackdown? So I thought it would be interesting to go down there and take pictures, and you can see this kind of thing going on all the time. The oppression that these people face who use drugs blew me away, because I was within earshot of the police, the underground police officer here in the blue jersey, and they just stop and tell people to empty their pockets. There's no respect. Is there any reason why they get angry? And that they have, they seek representation from the Pivot Legal Society. It's a very powerless group. Probably some of the most powerless people live in that postal code in the downtown east side. Yes. Yeah, the estimates are up to 10,000 addicts that frequent that area. I couldn't get into Insight, but they let me in the lobby and talk to some of the workers there for a while. There was a steady stream of people coming in to use Insight, and not a single person fit, what I thought a stereotype of a junkie might be. I mean, they look like us, and that really surprised me. I mean, there are people who are down and out in bad shape, there's no doubt about it.
Why would they bother them so much? Because they can't ticket them. Those people can't pay that ticket. It's the young kids, on the or us on the side of the street to get, this guy's good for a $500 fine.
Well, I think you'd have to ask the police that. But they would probably respond that, it's the law we enforce, and if you have a problem with the law, then talk to your MP. This is really interesting. I don't know if you've heard of Evan Wood. He's a lead author in many articles. He's very active with the BC Centre for Excellence in HIV Research. And they have, the medical community has a vested interest in rational drug policy. So they've done some studies that kind of expose these myths about crime and drugs. So in response to the police crackdown, what they discovered in their study was that the street price of heroin and cocaine remained stable. So the police enforcement did nothing to drive the price up, which is what you would expect. If supply became less, then you should expect the demand, the people that wanted the drugs to pay more for what was available to buy. The rates of intravenous drug use were unchanged. The change in neighborhood for injection drug use because of police presence was statistically significant. In other words, people did move, but where did they go? They didn't just stop using drugs. They moved to different parts of the city. And if you were following the media at the time, you would have heard of the merchants on, starts with R, the long street. Thank you, Robson Street, complaining about the addicts now being, in front of their stores, and driving tourists away and so on.
Well, they're displaced from Water Street, right?
Yeah.
They're just getting displaced farther down.
Yeah. And that's a trend we see in studies of crime enforcement a lot when it comes to these types of crackdowns. There was no statistically significant differences in the street price of heroin, cocaine, or crack in the 3-month period before and after the crackdown. So, I mean, this tells us that enforcement and these crackdowns do not deliver the consequences that the police and politicians believe they will. The drug markets just moved from downtown to Oppenheimer Park and elsewhere. I'm assuming these people are using drugs. I mean, I have no way of knowing, but.
Or playing cards.
Or playing, well, yeah, I'd be naive. Enforcement strategies, they stabilize drug markets and disperse concentrated drug scenes into surrounding areas. It's like whack-a-mole, that game in the arcades where you hit one mole and another one pops up. What it does is it separates drug users from health and prevention services like needle exchanges and treatment programs. And when drug markets are destabilized, we find over and over again that there's more violence, increased theft, property crime. And users may shift from smoking to injecting illicit drugs. There's a high risk of injecting has repeatedly been linked to enforcement practices. So people take greater risks when they don't have a safe place for what they think is a safe place to use. We're doing everything wrong. We really are. Since Inside Open, there's another study, I don't have it referenced here, but in terms of the amount of drug paraphernalia in public, since Inside Open, they had UBC students go and pick up all the garbage, like the drug-related paraphernalia, before Inside Open for 3 months. And then they followed it for a year after Inside was in operation. There's far less discarded syringes, used condoms and other drug paraphernalia. So is the Inside a good thing? It's unequivocally a good thing because it focuses on the health of the person and not their legal status. Now this was an interesting one. Here's Corporal Grant Larned, he used to be on the news a lot, standing behind 99 kilograms of high-grade heroin found in the frame of a container which arrived in Vancouver from China. That's in the year 2000. So the police were on record as saying, this is going to really put a dent in organized crime. This is going to take significant amounts of heroin off the market. But a subsequent study published in the Canadian Medical Association proved that this massive heroin seizure did not meaningfully affect heroin supply on Vancouver streets where prices remain low. Here's the United States experience with enforcement, at least for data that we had when the DEA was publishing this kind of thing. They won't put this information out anymore. I think the last one was in the early 2000s. What you see, though, is a pattern, and I'll show you other graphs that show the same thing collected by different agencies, is that the price of heroin is going down and the purity of heroin is going up. This is what drug enforcement has done. So again, the same pattern. The purity is dropping. The price is increasing according to the DEA. But not by much. That's not the sign of enforcement policies that are working to have an impact on the market. None whatsoever. This is from a Latin American lobby group. Well, I mean, they represent Latin American interests in the United States. And this is from their website, and the pattern's the same. What you're seeing is the percentages of retail purity of South American and Mexican heroin have nearly converged. So the main source of heroin used to come from countries like Bolivia and Colombia. When the Americans cracked down really hard there, and Pablo Escobar got killed, and and Manuel Noriega arrested, as the most expensive arrest in U.S. history. That trade was picked up by smaller organized crime units in South America. They're still operating. They're just more dispersed, and the Mexican drug lords have taken a real large role in bringing those supplies into North America. So I guess this is a rhetorical question by now. Regardless of enforcement expenditures, the negative effects of prohibition, including violence and criminal enrichment, have resulted, no matter where or when, prohibition has been tried. Hasn't worked.
No.
After 40 years or more, most drugs are more available, powerful, and inexpensive than ever. In the United States, the number of nonviolent drug offenders in prisons exceeds by 100,000 the total incarcerated population in the European Union, despite the fact that the EU has 100 million more citizens. Nevertheless, the U.S. drug supply and purity have reached an all-time high. So the Americans went on a prison building binge and quadrupled their prison populations from about Ronald Reagan until the present, and it hasn't made much of a dent, if any, on the supply of drugs.
Maybe Harper's trying to catch up.
Yeah. You get that impression sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
I before I met David Bratzer, I took this quote out of an article that he had written because it was the same thought that I had. So we're threatening people involved in organized crime with imprisonment. Oh, really? How much of a threat would imprisonment be for people who daily run the risk of being shot or injured, or other nasty things happen to them because they're involved in the drug trade? So the government responds with mandatory minimum sentence for cultivation offenses. Despite the evidence from the United States over and over again that mandatory minimum sentences have all kinds of unwanted consequences. Aside from filling prisons, they do other things as well, and that's what they do is they push the discretion back to the Crown, who then decides what charges are going to be laid if the accused pleads guilty. But if the accused is facing a mandatory minimum sentence, they're more likely to go to trial and pull out all the stops because they don't want to go to jail. Well, especially in the United States, where 3 strikes you're out, and you can serve anywhere from 10 to 15 years for a third felony.
Well, that would encourage the lawyers to be behind that, because that would give them more business.
There's going to be a lot of work for lawyers as a result of Bill C-10, and
that's why they're reluctant to get together and decriminalize.
It goes back to follow the money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, definitely money and power. And I think we're all aware, most of us are aware of how prohibition policies have taken Mexico almost in some areas to the brink of anarchy. There's so much violence. And study after study, and Evan Wood and his associates did a literature review that looked at the relationship between drug enforcement policies, crackdowns, and what it does to the drug markets. And almost without exception, I think there was one study that didn't show the same pattern, and that's that enforcement activities drive up the violence. Yeah.
Are you aware that when there's a crime in Mexico committed with guns and they get the people are arrested, or they seize weapons, that they send all the serial numbers are sent to the United States to try to find out where the guns came from, and 90% of them came from the United States.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
And especially when there was evidence that the DEA or operatives within the DEA were smuggling weapons to through Mexico and selling them at a high profit.
Boy.
I mean, and that's one of the things that this kind of mindset does, is that it really breeds corruption. You know, I mean, if you're a border guard in Mexico making, you know, maybe an above average wage, but still it's not great for someone to offer you the equivalent of a year's salary if you can just turn your head to the next vehicle that's going to come by and wave it through. Are you going to say no? If you do say no, you might get an offer that you can't refuse.
Nobody's a winner.
40,000 people have died in the Mexico drug war since Calderon's war on the drug game started in 2006. I've got a friend that runs a hostel in Mexico, and he says, John, it's not like that. You've got to come down here. It's really nice. This is from the U.S. National Drug Intelligence Center in 2010, and it shows at least the gangs that they're aware of in the United States that are involved in drug distribution.
Those are all separate gangs, not
Those are all separate
chapters.
gangs. Yeah, I mean, California, wow, it's got a lot of gangs in the south, but that's one of the main entry points. So legalizing drugs would yield about 88 billion per year between enforcement savings and tax revenue, according to a 2000 study by Harvard economics professor Jeffrey Myron. The federal drug enforcement budget for 2009 was $20 billion. That's 1/3 of the federal U.S. budget for education. So the constant demand plus increasing sentences equals higher profits. Something else that people don't know is that coca has been used by the Incan Indians for thousands of years. And we have anthropologists that tell us that when they go to the Andes, it's part of their culture to chew coca leaves. And they also they have some of the longest lifespans in the Andes as well. It's not uncommon to see people 80, 90, 100 years old. They've never, even though they have the ways of doing it, they've never had a need to make the drug more powerful than it is. It's plentiful, it's used socially, it helps them work. You know, it's kind of like coffee. It gives them a lift, maybe a bit of euphoria, but some people would describe tobacco and caffeine as having the same euphoric effect. Where cocaine came from was the market need to compress the drug so that it could be, so it could be transported across borders in secret containers. Crack cocaine is even a further refinement. Crack cocaine is a direct response to the enforcement activities of the United States predominantly. Because people that market this stuff are looking for more bang for their buck. They're in many ways they're exactly like corporations that want to make a profit with the least amount of investment in labor or products. If you ever bought an old Ford, you know what I'm talking about. Some of the cash here is just mind-boggling. Cash seized from a drug dealer is a mere $255 million in $100 bills. I see there's some Canadian money up front here. Tell me, Canadian hundreds.
Who cares about mandatory minimum?
Well, that was my point, exactly. If this is part of the rewards for involvement in the drug trade, I've had Mounties come and talk to my students about grow-offs that they've busted, and the minimum sentences, the low sentences that the people get. And I'm trying to convince my students that they shouldn't go into the drug trade after the They talk about seize. They seize the hydroponic lights. They put evidence stickers on them, and then they auction them all off. And then they have another bus, and they seize the lights, and they've got the auction stickers still on. It's a revolving circle. These guys get frustrated. $500 billion would cover a room 2,000 times the size. It's just staggering. I got some great pictures of half tons going through borders where they pulled the canopy back, the tonneau cover, and it's just packed with $100 bills right through the room.
They weigh it to tell how much.
That's right. They can't count it anymore. They weigh it. Yeah. Well, the Hells Angels in Montreal, when Mont Boucher was running the show, had two counting machines in separate rooms and apartments. And that's what they did for either 12 or 24 hours a day, was count cash. They would bring it in cardboard boxes and they would take it out in cardboard boxes. You know, you try and have a level of security before you get suspicious, but, you know, when the Hells Angels are running it, everybody's quiet. The United States has the highest rate of incarceration in the world, with a little less than 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. Imagine how many prisoners could be freed if we had an amnesty on drug crimes, nonviolent drug crimes.
Yeah.
And those fathers could return to their families, and those mothers could return to their families. I mean, look what we do to communities when we lock people up for being drug users.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The children could come out of foster care.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
People that would be lost to the system.
Yeah.
Where
The
are all
system,
those
yeah.
jailers going to get their wages?
It costs about $150 a day to keep a prisoner in provincial custody here in Nanaimo. Is that how you want your tax dollars spent? It costs anywhere from $65,000 to $120,000 to keep a federal prisoner in prison every year.
Why so much?
Well, we can talk about that later if you like. 19-year-olds is down to 22, 25%. In Western Europe, in Holland, which is quite permissive, very much less restrictive than the United States or Canada about drugs with their restaurants or their cafes. Cannabis use is lower in Holland than any of the other surrounding countries. The Dutch believe that you want to keep a barrier, a social barrier between hard drug users and soft drug users. You know, well, I don't have any cannabis, but you should try this. So, you know, I think that they're pragmatic. Sorry. Heroin overdoses are down by 52%, and HIV infections reported by drug users was down by 71%. Imagine the taxes that Portugal is saving by not having to offer life support and care for people with HIV. Since taking a public health approach to heroin in Switzerland, not one person in the program has died of a heroin overdose since it was implemented. They have something that's similar to the Naomi trials in North America, where people can receive prescription heroin. It's been going on in Liverpool for a long time as well. The studies report lower rates of crime, death, and disease, a drop in expected new users, and an improvement in mental and physical health, employment, and housing among people who are addicted. I've been told, and heroin addicts have told me, we don't want to get high, we just don't want to get sick. So many heroin addicts would like to be maintained at a level that allows them to operate functionally in society. If you ever get a chance, watch the David Suzuki two-part series called Dealing with Drugs. He filmed them 5 years apart, and he looks at 4 cities, 2 in Europe, Montreal, and New York. It's just mind-blowing. I like to have my students watch it because they have heroin addicts putting their tie on in the morning after they've administered heroin and going to work. What? Or a woman who picks up her heroin prescription from the pharmacist.
Methadone.
No, it's not methadone. It's heroin. She gets her prescription from the chemist at Walmart, and she takes that, and yeah, she says it's great. I don't have to be on the street anymore. They show her in her home with her husband and her 2 kids.
What's the show called?
It's called Dealing with Drugs by David Suzuki. We've got the 2-part series on video. I don't know if anyone has a video machine anymore. I'll see if I can order those by DVD, the National Film Order thing. Yeah. Nature of Things. That's a series. Okay, I think we're heading in the right direction. Mexico has decriminalized all drugs to reduce police corruption. I want to check that fact, because I know that the Latin America, this slide's not mine, I know that the Latin American countries are meeting jointly, against U.S. protests and obfuscation, to think of a strategy that's going to help end the violence in Latin America. Guatemala's really bad too, and other Central American countries. Argentina's Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional to arrest anyone for use of personal possession of any drug. Supreme Court of Colombia made the same ruling, and the Czech Republic has decriminalized all drugs. That doesn't mean that it's an open market on drugs. It means that they're regulated. Decriminalization is not enough. If you'd like to get involved, I so appreciate that you're here because you are involved, you are concerned, and that it's been some personal expense for yourself and time or money to be here. And there's lots of good causes to support. If it's your choice to support LEAP, I have with me envelopes and donation forms. You can become a member of LEAP by just going to their website. There's only one, it's the US one. And if you do make a donation, I'm authorized to give you a beautiful LEAP pin. This one's magnetic.
I lost mine.
So, but that's your choice. I think we're all on the same wavelength here, and that's to get some progress on cannabis and drugs generally. So
Thank you so much.
Could I ask about our...
I'm afraid we really don't have time for questions. John will be here for a few more minutes, so we'll be mingling in the hall and stuff. But 4:20 is coming very quickly. 4:20. We'll be having a raffle too outside as well, and we'll be out there in a few minutes. If you want to help out, the raffle tickets are $2 or 3 tickets for $5. Just a couple small prizes. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thanks especially for our speakers that came over from Vancouver.
Thanks, Dad.
Have a wonderful day.